Welcome to Have a Life Teaching, the podcast designed for educators who are dedicated to enhancing their teaching practice and creating a positive impact on their students' lives. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the world of education, exploring a wide range of topics related to curriculum, instruction, and assessment in K-12 schools. Together, we'll learn from the brightest minds in the education field. So if you're a passionate educator who's ready to take your teaching practice to the next level, join us as we explore the exciting world of education. My name is John Shimbari, signing in and saying, let's have a life teaching. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Have a Life Teaching podcast. One of the joys in my career as an educator was definitely being able to create and start as founding principal American History High School in Newark, New Jersey. And one of the reasons I really loved starting this school community in Newark, New Jersey, was given the rich history of Newark as a city itself. Even though we were teaching all the subject areas with students who had a special interest in history, we were looking at American history, but being placed and located in such a fascinating city with its own culture, its own community, really enabled us to look at national history as well as global history from a local viewpoint. It was exciting for me, at least, to see the interplay of global connections, national and local. So I was really excited when I connected with my next guests about place-based learning and the value and the joy and the excitement that can come from teaching things that our students need to know, not just in history, but in other subject areas as well. So with that in mind, I'm really excited to be joined by two of the three authors of the following book. The book is called Place-Based Learning, Connecting Inquiry, Community, and Culture. And two of the authors, like I said, are with us tonight. They are Micki Evans and Erin Sanchez. The third author not with us tonight is Charity Marcella Moran. And both Micki and Erin are educators in the Pacific Northwest in the Washington State area. So, ladies, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, John.
So the first question I really like to ask everyone, because as our paths in education vary, we think we're going to do one thing, we end up becoming passionate about something else, and our career takes off from there. So we'll start with Micki, and then we'll go to Erin. How did place-based learning become an area of interest for you?
Actually, it's been an interest for a long time. When I was in high school, I was kicked out of two high schools and I ended up at an alternative school. And there were three teachers who took the community that I grew up in, Bainbridge Island, off of Seattle, and really created these place-based journeys. So we delved deep into the Native American impact, the Japanese. In fact, on the island, we were the first pilot for Roosevelt to actually incarcerate Japanese Americans during World War II. So those adventures really just, one, made me feel very connected to the community and empowered me to have a voice to make positive impact. And so I decided at that point I wanted to become a teacher, and I took this whole experience and have been working with it for over 4 decades.
Love it. Erin, how about you?
I would say that my disconnect is what brought me to the desire to create more connections through place-based learning. So I grew up in a town in rural Minnesota, town of 739 people that lost their hometown school during the big consolidations in the 80s. And so I never really had much of a connection. My school was not connected to place. I guess the closest I would have come was through H. And after I graduated, the first charter law in the nation was passed in Minnesota. My hometown started a charter school, place-based, where students designed projects from their own passions, carried them out across the community, sometimes across the country, like paddle boating down the Mississippi River, doing water quality testing and discovering deformed frogs in the fields because of runoff from farming chemicals. And it just really changed the way I thought about the connection between school and place. But through experiences in college out here at the Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington, I started to see schools and tribal communities, students were participating in winter camp and working with tribal hatcheries. And it was so connected to community. And students, that sense of connection gave them a sense of self. And they never had to separate school from the lives outside of school. And so I changed my trajectory and became an educator.
In both of your journeys, I hear this concept of disconnect, where Micki was kicked out of 2 high schools. I can't believe that, but kicked out of 2 high schools. You were mentioning a disconnect even in the town where you grew up in, and the lack of connection between the school and the community. But then, Erin, you were talking about the connection you did feel when the charter school started in Missouri and the connection to environment. I was mentioning before my connection in my place-based school being the history of Newark. So clearly, place-based learning is an opportunity to connect what a region is known for or a city is known for to the learning of those students. So that way they can really benefit from those community resources. But before we even get much deeper into the concept of place-based learning, if I can have both of you describing how you define place-based learning and how you set up the organization of your book to highlight that, and then why is place-based learning such an important and exciting way to teach? So we'll start this time with Erin and then go to Micki.
Mhm. We often call place-based learning the pedagogy of connectedness, and for good reason, because we want students to see themselves in everything they do in school and feel that sense of continuity throughout their lives. As we organized our book and worked in communities on place-based learning, we came to discover those essential design principles that really foster a rich place-based learning journey, like elevating students' cultural ways of knowing to the same level of importance as standards, facilitating that purpose-driven inquiry, getting at the why they're doing what they're doing, that deeper meaning. And sometimes it's them looking at their community to figure out what might be worth this deep inquiry. So oftentimes teachers live in the community that they teach in, and they see it from a different lens than our students do. So we're asking them to go on their own discovery in order to find opportunities for students to bring their place to life. And then we get into the book in how to just actually design a place-based learning journey, just some of those logistics, and also how to make it equitable. What is truly decolonizing assessment practices? What does that mean? And how do they go about doing it? And then we also have a whole section for leaders, school leaders like you who are starting these schools. And what do they need to know and be able to do? And what barriers can they remove so that students can take ownership over this? And then the role of community partners, which Micki can speak to so eloquently, but making sure that they have a strong voice in this as well.
Thank you. Micki?
All right. Ditto to everything that Erin said. One of the other design principles is culturally embedded. So really looking at the cultures that you serve within school, within the communities. And I think an underlying theme throughout the book is storytelling, the power of story. And we encourage teachers and educators to pull out the place stories of their students because oftentimes they're very different. And so we can begin to understand. And then looking at the community, what are the stories of the community? And we really focus not only on the community stories, but those untold stories, right? Or mistold stories. So kids can really unpack the stories and maybe some of the misperceptions around that and be able to leverage making a positive difference in their community. So we want to give them voice. And once again, we do align to standards, very evident how you can address your standards while also doing a place-based journey. And the assessment piece really shifts, right? Within place-based learning and project-based learning, it looks different because we're really looking for evidence that they've either have gained the content, mastered the content, but also those process skills that are so important for life in general.
And we're definitely going to talk about what assessment looks like in place-based learning. But I'm wondering, because you both bring it up, what is the positive role that place-based learning has when it comes to equity? I do a lot of work in traditionally challenged communities, marginalized communities. And sometimes I find in the work that I'm doing, these communities don't realize they too have a rich culture worth celebrating for promoting equity and self-efficacy. Let's start with Micki and then we'll go with Erin.
Within place-based learning, there's lots of opportunity for students to have voice and choice and to really look at their own culture, seeing it in the classroom. By creating place-based journeys, there's lots of opportunity for kids to follow their own passion within that framework. We really see place-based learning as a framework to really decolonize the curriculum. So we're looking at different voices, different historical voices, and some of the common stories that we tell, then also the underlying stories that really get at some of those very issues. You used the example within history, right?
Now, Erin, before we go to you, I like how Micki brought up decolonization. I think the three of us know what that means, but for the benefit of our listeners, when you talk about this equity piece, when it comes to place-based learning, Erin, could you walk us through a little bit more? What, in your opinion, does that entail as well?
Yeah. So when we think about how students learn best and how students learned traditionally before colonization of the Americas, and then sit that side by side with the industrial model of schooling, and we analyze all of those structures and routines and think about what actually works best for who our students are and how they learn, we'll find that a lot of things should be falling to the wayside, right? Everything from siloing subjects into specific disciplines to ringing bells every 45 minutes to force students to move from one subject to the next, to the hierarchy within schools. All of those things that if we do a deep examination of, we often find that we're just replicating that because it's easiest. When we start to tear down some of those structures, either through something as simple as connecting with a community partner and involving them in one aspect of a unit that we already teach, but that we want to give a little more authenticity, then we think, wow, like we should do more of this, but it's hard to do that in a 45-minute period. So, what if we reimagined it and had a common planning period between the science teacher and the art teacher? So, we could create a salt marsh mural. So, it's like those small steps that help us see the power of decolonizing part of our school structures or our curriculum. And hopefully, that has like a snowball effect, right?
And it's funny, as you were talking, Erin, I was thinking back on some of the other shows or podcast episodes that I've done with guests. And it's really going to be hard to market yours because I'm going to have to also market 5 others that it connects to, which is actually a nice problem to have. And then when you were mentioning community partners, that brought me to the episodes that I did with folks on project-based learning. And one of the projects that my guests were talking about was there was a teacher at High Tech High in San Diego, and they connected with the Japanese American Museum in San Jose, and they helped the docents at the Japanese American Museum reconfigure their tours to make those tours more engaging for youth. So again, you see that connection to community, that community project. But place-based learning has so many components. And we could continue to talk about all the good connections. You both mentioned, though, three specific things that I picked up: learning design principles, place-based journeys. I know Micki was talking about place-based journeys. And then I know in the book you also talk about implementation with equity in mind. So, could we walk through what those three different concepts are? Because I think that will help our listeners, those listeners that are interested in bringing place based learning into their school community. So, we'll start with Erin this time and then we'll go to Micki. Designing or having learning design principle, or what are the learning design principles when it comes to place-based learning? Then in the middle of your book, you talk about place-based journeys. So what do we mean about journeys? And then lastly, you talk about implementation for school communities that are interested in adopting a place-based learning community. So would you mind walking us through those three elements of place-based learning? And we'll start with Erin and then we'll go to Micki.
Those design principles really did come about after many years of Micki and I working alongside each other in communities. And we realized, like, what are those ingredients that need to be present for place-based learning to become systemic and be transformative for students? And so those are to elevate ways of knowing, students' ways of knowing, that purpose-driven inquiry, the why we would be doing what we're doing, building those authentic community partnerships and having a reason to build those, empowering student ownership right from the get-go, engaging in a feedback, revision, and reflection cycle so that students can work to produce something that they are proud of and that is useful outside of the classroom, to co-create an authentic community product. So not only are students proud of it, but it's useful, right? To embed culture in teaching and learning. It is woven throughout a place-based learning journey. And then when we talk about place-based learning journeys, you might consider that a project, right? But to distinguish place-based learning from the larger umbrella of project-based learning, place-based learning doesn't often fit super neatly on a calendar. With any journey, you're veering off in one direction based on how brilliant your students are and what they want to do and your community partners' needs. And sometimes there's a little bit of a start and a stop. Of course, it has to have a beginning and an ending, right? There is a destination. But that's one way that we help to distinguish between what you might typically hear of as a project and what we call place-based learning journeys. One thing I want to bring up is that the starting point for a journey, there's not just one starting point, but something that we recommend, and part of our tool for planning a place-based learning journey is community asset mapping. So asking a teacher to both map the assets in her classroom, meaning all of that brilliance that students are bringing with them into the classroom, and how to really utilize that to come up with place-based learning journeys, and then also mapping the community at large and getting a real sense of place, because place is environment, place is also people.
Micki, how about you?
The principles really provide our framework for place-based learning. And with the design principles, they're all integrated. They're all interrelated. We provide a tool for asset mapping, but we also provide a tool for planning your journey that really gets teachers to think about, how am I embedding culture into the project? How is my community product truly authentic? And who else is going to work with us, with the students, in creating that? For implementation, how do we sustain this? So you can have one teacher implement, but if you have a whole school or a group of teachers really excited about doing this, you are able to hold each other accountable, support each other in the storytelling and that sort of thing. And so we build in what we call practitioners round, which is a set of protocols that we suggest schools go through. So one might be, you've designed a journey and you're going to do a tuning protocol to get some feedback from everybody else on your project idea. So we're making it better. But by sharing our work through protocols, it becomes community's work, right? It's not just my work, it's everybody's work. So I think that's a real critical piece. And so we discuss with what leaders can do to facilitate the sustaining of place-based learning in their schools, and also to support those teachers and community partners, because we're really looking at how can we create this not just once relationship, but a long-term relationship with community organizations, members, and so forth.
And to your point, how do you make this truly a sustained part of schooling, not just a one and done project? But again, how does it become the heart of your school community? And clearly, you two have passion for this. You've seen it done. So let's talk a little bit then about perhaps some of the schools you work with that have really done a great job of having place-based learning at the core. Can you describe some of the school communities you've worked with and the exciting place-based learning journeys that they have taken?
I worked with a tribal school in Arizona, and they were really focused on how they can make learning engaging. And so they came to place-based learning as a possibility, especially for the culturally embedded. And so we began by having them go out and interview all the tribal agencies and to really begin to say, what are some of your issues? How might we be able to work together on the project? And so it was really fascinating to think about the projects that they came up with. So one was wildlife management, right? And so they really wanted to be able to share their culture and their history with public members who come and visit it. So they begin to understand how Native tribes actually manage the resources. So that was really powerful. And it made kids really proud of their culture, because oftentimes when you first go in, it's, I'm just getting off of the res.
Looking at wildlife management issues on the reservation in Arizona, how did some of the students, or what are some of the ways in which students approach that topic?
One of the things they were doing was they were talking about hunting, and most of the kids and families were hunters, and trying to get the meat that they hunt into the local grocery store so that there are the cultural food into the grocery store. So that was one aspect. One was telling the story, past, present, and into the future about the animals and the environment. Another group, they went on another tangent. They interviewed all the agencies and wanted to find out about healing ceremonies and things that come up as part of their tradition. And they created a calendar with information about that particular tradition, when it might be celebrated, so that they were trying to bring people back to their traditions, their cultural traditions. So really rejuvenating that, which oftentimes have been lost.
So, what were some of the process skills students learned doing this? And what were some of the academic skills that they learned?
So the process skills were around collaboration, being able to interview experts and community members. Academics were around science. How do you manage the husbandry of all of that, the fishing, and understanding that balance there? Also, there's always some sort of writing or oral presentation. There are lots of different ways, collecting data, bringing that in with the math concepts. And of course, art is huge and was huge in this project.
And then, Erin, how about you? What were some of the exciting things that you've seen school communities do when it comes to place-based learning?
I think what's most exciting for me is when a really traditional school place-based learning for the first time. It's not that it has to be like wall-to-wall place-based learning. It can be just even in one subject area or with one teacher. And what came to mind as Micki was sharing was a school we worked with a number of years ago, Cherokee Central School in Cherokee, North Carolina. It's the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, traditional looking school. And as the teachers were thinking about like, where could students take this? They said, we have some really dangerous roads with logging trucks, just night and day going up and down these mountainous roads and hairpin turns. And how could our students use mathematics to figure out how to make our roads safer? And the project that they came up with, working with Micki and I over the course of 3 days, was phenomenal. And I was so excited for them to try it. And then when we came back to them, they had figured out using data, some surveys that they had done of the community as well, like where to put the mirrors on the roads, where they needed better lighting. And it was really awesome. Even though that might have been a pocket inside one traditional school, what it sparked was pretty incredible. So I think of examples like that more so sometimes than I do like schools that are doing place-based learning every day.
And even going back to what we were talking about before, it sounds like you two do a lot of work in tribal communities. And when we look at the history of how we have educated Indigenous children, it's exciting even to hear about these projects. Yes, Erin, you're right. It might be just one little project, but it symbolizes a lot, in my opinion. When we look back at that history, that horrible, troubling history, and we see now how Indigenous children are able to learn, but learn within the construct of their communities rather than being pulled away from those and pulled apart from those. It's one project, but it symbolizes a lot more than just that one project, in my opinion.
While I was thinking about the Codman project, Erin, where that really became an equity project, they were measuring the stairs within their community and they were so uneven, not up to code at all. And so it really turned into an equity project, right? Like, why are the stairs in our community so different than the stairs in the community over yonder, right? And so that's one way you can bring that aspect in. And then Charity, the case study of the place-based journey in our book is called Troubled Waters, and it's about what happened to all the public swimming pools in Baton Rouge and why, and how the students who are all Black were looking at how can we create a pool that's open to the public.
And I'm glad you mentioned Dr. Delpit because I'm sure you get it as well at times. What is the pushback you get against place-based learning, and how do you help them to still push forward? What are the challenges in implementing place-based learning, and how do we get around them? We'll start with Erin, and then we'll go to Micki.
Time. Time is the biggest pushback, right? This erroneous idea that I know I even had in the classroom sometimes too, that to do the work that I knew was going to be so meaningful and transformative for students, I would have to give up some other part of my curriculum. But I also think, coming back to what I said last time, that you can start small and take a look at the entirety of what you teach in a year and figure out what's going to lend itself really well to a place-based learning journey. It doesn't have to take up a giant portion of your 180 days of teaching. It can be over a couple of weeks even, but finding those natural connections, finding the content that really requires more authenticity for students to get it, right? For it to really click and make sense. That's something we talk about too, like what are those entry points in your curriculum and how can you do some place-based learning mapping? If you look at the big picture of an entire year of content, where are those few spots that are just ripe for place-based learning? I remember when I was a place-based learning coach at Chief Leschi schools here in Tacoma for the Puyallup Nation, they hadn't worked with their tribal hatchery in over 10 years. They just lost those connections. But we were gifted a giant aquarium, which was sitting in the library empty. And I said, we've got to do something with this. We got to call the hatchery and get some salmon roe in that thing. So we worked with a group of fifth graders who composed the email and wrote a phone script and picked up the phone and called. So we talk about how leaders and instructional coaches can really leverage their role to create a community partner database so that when teachers do find those spots in their curriculum, when they might include a journey, they can also turn to their leaders and their instructional coaches and say, who in the community has some expertise in this, or who in the community might need our support? So those are just a few areas.
Where do you see the challenge points?
Yeah, so I'm working with a school right now, an alternative school, and when we talk about a community partnership, they just go, oh, our kids can't handle it. We cannot take them in public. And so it's how do we shift that mindset about what our kids can do, right? And these assumptions that hold us back about what we think our kids can't do. The leader there said, so what if they offend? So what if they swear? Okay. They know this is the alternative school. So just being able to take that risk, it doesn't have to be perfect. It's messy. And when we're trying to get feedback from our community partners, pretty soon they're going to just rise to the occasion. There's definitely that. And of course, I always try and encourage teachers to look at your units. What's a long unit that you're already doing, right? One that takes more than 2 weeks. Is there a way that we can turn that into a place-based learning journey that has roots in the local community?
And it was funny as you were talking, Micki, I was thinking about the fact that I too, when I suggest to people, you're doing this unit, reach out to a community partner, make it more engaging for that real life learning connection for kids. They need to see mentors. They need to work with folks in the community to see how they should act professionally. None of us got our professional skills out of the air. We got them often through internships or externships. A lot of communities don't have access to those opportunities. So as long as our community partners, like your community partners, Micki, understand that they are adolescents and that this is how they're going to start gaining those skills. It is about the project helping students develop those social emotional learning skills that are going to make them strong community members as they continue to mature. So I'm glad that you mentioned that and that you help your clients to push through that because our kids really do need that. One area that we haven't talked about yet as a possible challenge, I suspect you might have at times gotten teachers that have said, this is all great, but I have to prepare my students for the standardized assessment that's coming up. What they're doing with place-based learning when they have to perform this type of activity on a standardized assessment. I think it was Micki, you were starting to talk about the role of assessment in place-based learning. So let's address that now. And we'll start with Micki and then we'll go to Erin.
So one of the things we know that in a place-based journey, especially when it's tied to standards that are going to be tested, the kids learn it at such a greater depth. It's not where they memorize it for that next day when they're tested, they know it, and then there's really no connection. So we do know there has been some research done that shows kids doing place-based learning or project-based learning actually perform better on many of those traditional tests.
The place-based learning journeys are standards aligned, but it's just going more in depth and creating products that exhibit a much deeper understanding of the content. Sometimes we confuse giving students test-taking skills with having them learn the content that they're asked to exhibit on a test. And we can take time and learn test-taking skills, but that's very different than actually being able to exhibit a deep understanding of content. Honestly, to assuage fears, we just make sure that every place-based learning journey is well aligned to standards and that what students are producing is not only necessary to them, to their community, but also is the best way to show what they know, both with content and with skills.
Aligned with what they were doing in social studies. And at first they were very confused or, oh, this is going to take us forever. So I said, let's ask ChatGPT, what are the typical writing assignments that would be aligned with the New Jersey state social studies standards? Okay, this type of writing, this third type of writing. Great. Now let's ask ChatGPT for a rubric. So I've really even been spending a lot of time in my coaching bringing in AI to help make those explicit connections in a creative way that I could never do. How has AI affected place-based learning? And we'll start with Erin and then we'll go to Micki. What were some of the things that were discussed in that fishbowl? And how do you see, even if you haven't used AI yet in your work, how do you think it might in the future impact the place-based learning consulting you're doing?
Assessment is a really great thing to bring up because oftentimes, if we already have the assessment tools, like we have a rubric in our book to help teachers who are designing place-based learning journeys to make sure it contains all of those design principles to a rigorous degree. And they could plug in our planner to a chat GPT along with our assessment tool and the quality indicators therein to see where their project is really strong and where they might be able to put more emphasis on another principle. So that's one area. Or even just we talk about building single point rubrics that are equitable in nature, but still standards aligned, but also culturally embedded. And so I can also see like putting in some of the criteria to help teachers create single point rubrics for place-based learning journeys. Because right now, as we were discussing in the fishbowl, the way it's most commonly used is just to come up with initial project ideas. And with place-based learning journeys, it's so unique to the place that AI struggles a bit because that might be something that needs to come from us. And then it's those more mundane tasks like rubric creation that they might be able to support on.
Exactly. How about you, Micki? Where do you see AI influencing and helping educators adopt place-based learning?
One of the big obstacles is oftentimes you can't get the kids out of the classroom, or you might not be able to even get the experts in. So we're looking at how do we use VR and AR to augment the place-based journeys if you can't get them out of the classroom so that they can experience that. That's one of the things that I see is really powerful for place-based learning, and it really addresses the obstacles of being able to get your kids outside.
It's funny you say that, Micki, because just the other day, again, it's an episode that aired yet, but I was talking to someone about how we use AI in creative ways, and they were talking about choose your own adventures, talking about journeys. And so this guest was talking about creating a choose your own adventure going through ancient Rome. I happen to be very interested in World War II, and prior to World War II, I was just playing around with ChatGPT and I asked it for a choose your own adventure for Weimar Germany. I can't tell you how good this thing was. Now, at first, it created a choose your own version that allowed students to opt out too quickly. Like it said, all right, you can answer A and do this, you could answer B and go here, or you could say you're done. So when I went back to the prompt, I said, no, they have to go through every station or every chapter, but how they get there can be different and what they do with each chapter to prove that they've learned content can be different, but we can't let them out until they've done every chapter. It gave me links to art, it gave me links to music, it gave me links to videos of cabaret life. It was truly amazing. Virtual reality and virtual field trips. I'm definitely going to be doing a show on that in the future because it's come up a bunch of times. But we can even add AI and we could add these choose your own adventures to place-based learning. Now, again, to Erin's point, maybe ChatGPT doesn't know as much about local indigenous communities in Washington state, but What if we feed that information into AI and then say, AI, take this information about this tribe and their desire to wildlife management. Create a choose your own adventure using the data we just input for our kids. I think AI can make place-based learning more equitable still for, again, those students who can't go out and for people who can't come in, particularly if we're even talking about rural communities. It's an embarrassment of riches, but not everyone has that privilege.
Especially in rural communities, but sometimes even, like you said, embarrassment of riches within a major city. Charity just this past week did a deep dive at the Deeper Learning Conference in San Diego on the High Tech High campus. She was taking teachers on a place-based learning journey to Chicano Park there, allowing students to give us a window into how they see their community and what in their community they don't see, that they don't have access to.
I think it's all connected. And getting back to AI, it's really about using AI to help us do what we need to do and want to do. So I see the connection there. So now, ladies, what have we not talked about that you think it's important for our listeners to know about place-based learning? And we'll start with, I don't know who I started with last time. Erin, was it you? We'll start with Erin and then we'll go to Micki.
I think what is top of mind after our full conversation, because you've also allowed me to just remember schools and communities that I worked with, and how place-based learning journeys can be transformative for students and for educators. Codman Academy Public Charter School in Dorchester, Massachusetts. Codman has been around for almost 30 years, and now the school itself houses a clinic, and it is so much a part of that community that I don't think they could even imagine a Dorchester without Codman. And the same is true for my little hometown in Minnesota, where Minnesota New Country School just celebrated its 31st year for this K-12 school. Students write articles in the local newspaper every week. They help co-manage the nature center in town. They work for the back to the 50s car cruise in the summer every Tuesday night, the classic cars. And again, it's just become so integral to the community that you can't separate the two anymore. And that's exactly what we want with the pedagogy of connectedness.
Talk about an answer to a student question. Where am I ever going to use this? Just look around, everything you're doing with the elders, with the community, with people younger than you, how you're supporting community growth. I think if there's anything that comes from this conversation, it's the power of place-based learning in empowering individuals and the community systemically.
How are we going to be engaging our students, and how are we using an equity lens so that they do feel connected to their own culture and to their community? And as Erin referred to, the pedagogy of connectedness, it really is all about that. And so that call to action is, how do we engage kids in their community? How do we give the skills to use their voice to create positive change? You can start small, but with community partners, we're providing kids with different career pathways. And for some of the kids who have never even thought about that, I had no idea that within farming, there's all sorts of different offshoots of work that I can do. So start small, get your feet wet, and yeah, join the call to action.
Will do. You sold me. So now, Micki, where can people find out more about you and the work that you do?
So I'm on LinkedIn, and then PBL Path, we're on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn.
Nice. And Erin, how about you?
Yep, I'm on all those platforms as well. And you can also visit our website, pblpath.com.
So, ladies, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a very interesting conversation.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening today. I hope you got some great tips that you can bring back into your teaching. Remember, have a life teaching without sacrificing your own. Also, don't forget to subscribe and be well.